My friend, there comes a moment in every person's life when the weight of lack feels unbearable, when bills stack higher than faith, when dreams seem too expensive to chase, and when hope whispers, maybe it's too late. But let me tell you something today. God never created you to live in lack. You were not born to struggle endlessly. You were designed for increase, for overflow, for abundance. And that's not a fantasy, that's divine truth. Money has never been the real problem. The real battle has always been inside, in what you believe about yourself and about God's ability to provide. See, wealth doesn't begin in your hands. It begins in your heart. Before a seed ever grows in the soil, it must first live in your spirit. When you begin to see yourself as heaven sees you, favored, anointed, and supplied, that's when miracles begin to unfold. The truth is, many of us have been praying for financial breakthroughs while still thinking like the broken. We ask God for more, but prepare for less. Yet heaven responds not to fear, but to faith. When you dare to believe that God can raise wealth out of your wilderness, that's when He begins to send divine ideas, supernatural connections, and doors you never even knew existed. So don't despise small beginnings. Don't mourn what you've lost. Start where you are with what you have and watch how faith multiplies it. Wealth is not about numbers. It's about mindset. You may have nothing in your bank, but if you carry faith in your heart, you already hold the currency of heaven. Faith. It's not just a word we say in passing or a feeling we hold when times get tough. Faith is the invisible force that connects the natural world to the supernatural realm. In heaven's economy, money isn't the currency. Faith is. Where the world says you need capital to begin, heaven says you need belief. The moment you choose to trust God beyond what your eyes can see, a divine transaction begins to take place. Heaven's supply starts to move toward the heart that believes. When you operate by faith, you no longer live by the limits of your job, your education, or your circumstances. You step into a realm where lack loses its grip and miracles become normal. Faith speaks when logic is silent. Faith builds when resources are invisible. It is the bridge between your current struggle and your future abundance. Everything you've been praying for, the provision, the business, the open doors, is already accounted for in heaven's storehouse. Faith is simply the key that unlocks it. Faith doesn't wait for the right conditions, it creates them. When you believe that God is your source, your spirit refuses to settle for survival. You begin to think differently, talk differently, and expect differently. Faith gives birth to action, not panic, but purpose. When you believe that the one who created gold and silver is also your Father, you stop chasing what others chase and start attracting what others can. The problem isn't that heaven has run out of blessings. It's that earth has run out of believers. Faith refuses to be moved by bank balances or bad reports. It sees beyond the numbers into the promise. While the world teaches that seeing is believing, heaven teaches that believing is seeing. When you believe first, God causes what's unseen to manifest before your eyes. Every miracle ever recorded began with faith. The widow with the oil didn't have wealth, she had obedience. The man at the pool didn't have strength, he had faith to rise. Faith converts impossibility into opportunity. It invites God to do what man cannot. You see, heaven doesn't respond to emotion, status, or logic. It responds to faith. When you declare, even in your lowest moment, God, I still trust you, something begins to shift in the unseen. Angels are dispatched. Favor begins to find you. Resources you couldn't have planned for start aligning in your path. Faith is not the denial of reality. It is the announcement of a greater one. It declares, I may not have it now, but I already possess it in spirit. That confession transforms spiritual potential into physical manifestation. Faith is also the language of partnership with God. When you operate in faith, you're not begging heaven, you're agreeing with it. You're stepping into divine alignment where God's will becomes your expectation. You don't plead for provision, you proclaim it. You don't hope for favor, you walk in it. Faith transforms your prayers from desperation into declaration. It's no longer, Lord, please make a way, but Lord, thank you that the way is already made. That shift in speech changes the atmosphere around you. Faith-filled words carry power because they echo heaven's truth. When you speak from faith, you are not describing your situation, you are defining it. You're calling those things that be not as though they were. And heaven always responds to that call, but faith must be tested before it can be trusted. Every believer who walks the path of divine provision must first pass through the valley of uncertainty. It is in that valley that faith matures. When everything looks contrary to the promise, when your prayers seem unanswered, that's when faith proves its worth. Faith isn't built in comfort, it's forged in conflict. True faith says, even if I don't see it yet, I still believe. It's easy to believe when the accounts are full, but it's powerful to believe when nothing seems to work. That kind of faith shakes the gates of lack and commands increase. God doesn't test your faith to break you. He tests it to strengthen you. Every delay is a setup for demonstration. Every trial is an invitation to trust deeper. And here's the beauty. When you live by faith, you live above the system. Inflation can't touch heaven's economy. Recession can't cancel divine provision. While others panic, you prosper because faith anchors you in a source that never runs dry. It doesn't matter what the news says or what the market predicts. Faith keeps your eyes on the one who owns it all. The moment you choose to walk by faith, you stop being a victim of circumstances and become a vessel of supernatural supply. Faith attracts ideas, draws opportunities, and multiplies what little you have into more than enough. It's not magic, it's divine law. As long as your faith remains alive, your future remains open. Faith is not about what you hold in your hand, it's about what you hold in your heart. When your heart believes, heaven releases. Your outer world will always be a reflection of your inner world. The condition of your finances mirrors the condition of your thoughts. You can't live in abundance while thinking in scarcity. You can't expect overflow while meditating on limitation. The truth is, your mindset is the soil where every seed of wealth is planted. If the soil is full of doubt, fear, or unworthiness, no seed can take root. But when your thoughts align with faith, purpose, and vision, prosperity begins to grow naturally. Money doesn't start with money, it starts with mentality. The most successful people didn't begin with resources, they began with revelation. They saw something greater within themselves long before the world did. And until you renew your mind, wealth will always slip through your hands because it can never stay where it's not mentally sustained. The mind either multiplies or minimizes everything God gives. When you learn to think abundance, you begin to live abundance. Your mindset is a magnet. It attracts what you consistently meditate on. If you constantly think lack, you unconsciously push opportunities away. But when you carry a mindset of faith and expectancy, life begins to respond in your favor. People, ideas, and divine appointments start showing up as if drawn to your energy. That's not coincidence. That's the law of alignment. God designed your thoughts to create motion in the spiritual realm. When you say, I can't afford that, you shut the door to possibility. But when you say God will make a way, you open heaven's window. The poor mindset waits for miracles, but the wealthy mindset walks with them. You can't see increase while speaking decrease. What you confess continually becomes what you live eventually. Your words born from your thoughts shape the world around you. Your financial destiny is determined by how you perceive yourself in God's plan. If you see yourself as a struggler, you'll attract struggle. If you see yourself as a steward of divine wealth, you'll attract increase. God never called you to be a beggar, He called you to be a builder. Yet so many limit themselves because they carry an internal ceiling, the belief that wealth is for others, not them. That's a lie the enemy uses to keep people small. God doesn't bless you based on where you started. He blesses you based on how you think. When your mind catches the revelation that you are a joint heir of divine provision, your actions shift automatically. You stop asking for just enough to survive and begin believing for more than enough to overflow. That shift in thought breaks poverty at its root. Transformation never begins in your pocket. It begins in your perspective. You can change jobs, cities, or even relationships. But if your thinking remains the same, your results will repeat. You'll keep facing the same financial walls because you're carrying the same mental patterns. Prosperity isn't just about earning, it's about expanding. When your mind is renewed, even small beginnings become platforms for greatness. You begin to see opportunity where others see obstacles. You stop asking, "Can I?" and start declaring, "I will." That's when faith and action merge and heaven breathes on your efforts. Your mindset becomes the architect of your financial future. As you think, you build. As you believe, you become. A renewed mind doesn't chase wealth, it creates it through wisdom, vision, and consistency. Every wealthy person, whether spiritual or secular, operates by one universal truth: money follows mindset. It doesn't follow hustle, luck, or connections. It follows consciousness. If your inner belief is anchored in lack, no amount of effort can permanently change your outcome. You'll always return to the level of your thinking, but when your mind expands, everything around you expands too. You'll begin to see solutions where others see problems. You'll manage small blessings well because you expect larger ones. God trusts increase into the hands of those whose minds are prepared to handle it. He's not withholding, He's waiting. When your mindset matures, your finances will follow. It's never about the size of your paycheck. It's about the size of your perception. A renewed mindset doesn't ignore reality, it redefines it. It sees past the facts into faith. It acknowledges the mountain but speaks to it with authority. That's the secret difference between the rich in spirit and the poor in thought. The same challenge that makes one person quit becomes another's opportunity because of mindset. Your mind is the command center of your destiny. Every time you meditate on God's promises of provision, you rewire your brain to expect increase. You begin to attract divine strategy, creative solutions, and supernatural favor. When you think like a steward instead of a struggler, you stop living from crisis to crisis and start living from glory to glory. The moment your thoughts rise, your life rises with them. Because in heaven's order, your mindset always determines your money. Too many people delay their destiny waiting for perfect conditions that will never come. They say, "Once I have more money, I'll start," or "when I get the right opportunity, I'll move forward." But the truth is, increase doesn't begin when everything is ready. It begins when you're ready. The seed of greatness is never found in what you don't have. It's hidden in what you already hold. Every miracle in Scripture began with something small. A boy's lunch fed thousands. A widow's oil paid off her debts. A staff in Moses' hand split the Red Sea. God never asks you for what you don't possess. He asks you to trust Him with what you do. What you call not enough is often heaven's chosen starting point. When you stop despising small beginnings and start activating small faith, multiplication begins. The blessing isn't in the abundance you're waiting for, it's in the obedience you practice right now. Starting with what you have means refusing to measure your potential by your possessions. Too often we disqualify ourselves because our resources look insignificant. But God delights in using the unlikely to accomplish the impossible. When you release what's in your hand, He releases what's in His. It's not the size of your gift that matters. It's the spirit of your giving. If you'll use what's available, your talent, your time, your voice, your idea, God will breathe on it. What you think is ordinary can become extraordinary once it's placed in divine hands. The difference between those who prosper and those who stay stuck is not access, but attitude. One sees lack and complains. The other sees opportunity and creates. It's never about how much you start with. It's about how much faith you put behind it. And many people wait for doors to open before they move, but sometimes God is waiting for movement before He opens doors. Faith acts first. You don't need the entire staircase to take the first step. Start with what you have. The skills you already know, the connections you already have, the wisdom you've already gathered. Every great vision begins small. If you can be faithful in the little, heaven will make you ruler over much. When you pour out what's in your jar, God fills it again. But when you hold back, fearing it's too little, it remains little. The flow of blessing follows the flow of obedience. You activate divine increase by taking bold steps, not safe ones. Every seed left unplanted is potential wasted. God cannot multiply what you refuse to move. When you shift your focus from what's missing to what's available, your perspective changes completely. Instead of saying, I can't do this without more, you begin to declare, I'll do what I can with what I have. That's where divine creativity begins to operate. When Jesus asked the disciples to feed the crowd, all they had were 5 loaves and 2 fish, but that was enough. The moment they surrendered it, multiplication began. The same applies to you. You may not have the platform, but you have the purpose. You may not have the capital, but you have the calling. Use it, speak it, sow it. Every time you use what you have, you invite heaven to do what you can't. The supernatural always partners with the simple. It's not the quantity that counts, it's the willingness to release it. The mindset of lack keeps you stuck in comparison. It makes you believe that someone else's advantage cancels your potential. But in God's design, no one's blessing diminishes yours. He specializes in taking the overlooked and turning them into overcomers. If all you have is an idea, a small business, a single opportunity, that's enough for Him to multiply. Stop waiting for validation to start. Stop waiting for perfection to begin. Start where you are and let your faith fill the gaps. The enemy wants you to believe that small means insignificant, but small is the birthplace of every miracle. A single spark starts a fire. A single seed grows a forest. When you honor what you have, you prepare yourself for what's coming. Gratitude turns small things into great beginnings. Everything you need for your next level is already in your reach. It might not look like much, but it's enough to begin. What you have in your hand today can open the door to tomorrow's abundance. When you stop focusing on what's missing, you make room for divine multiplication. Heaven doesn't move through what's absent. It moves through what's available. God never said, bring me what you wish you had. He said, use what I've already given you. The greatest mistake is not starting too small, it's not starting at all. If you give your best where you are, God will meet you where you dream to be. Every harvest begins with a single seed, and your seed is already in your possession. You just have to release it, trust it, and watch it grow. Fear is the silent thief of destiny. It whispers that you are not enough, that you will fail, that what you hold will never be enough to make a difference. But God has never responded to fear. He responds to faith. In every generation, the ones who walked in abundance were those who dared to believe when everything around them said otherwise. Faith is heaven's signal of readiness. Fear is the evidence of unbelief. When God looks to bless, He searches not for the talented or the connected, but for the faithful. Those who trust Him even when they cannot trace Him. Those who keep sowing even when the ground looks barren. The fearful bury their seed, but the faithful plant it. And it is the planted seed, not the protected one, that multiplies. Fear keeps your blessings locked in potential. Faith releases them into manifestation. You don't need to know how it will happen. You just need to believe that it will. Faith and fear cannot occupy the same heart. One builds while the other destroys. Fear paralyzes, faith activates. The faithful step forward while the fearful step back. And in that single step of obedience, destinies are decided. God cannot multiply what fear hides, but He will multiply what faith releases. Every great move of God in Scripture began with a faithful act in the face of fear. Noah building the ark, Abraham leaving his homeland, Peter stepping out of the boat. None of them knew the outcome, but all of them trusted the one who called them. That's the difference. Faith doesn't demand details, it demands obedience. When you move by faith, heaven moves with you. But when you hesitate in fear, even miracles wait. God will never ask you to understand before you act. He asks you to believe before you see. The fearful focus on what might go wrong, but the faithful focus on what God has already promised. Fear magnifies the obstacle. Faith magnifies the outcome. When you walk in fear, you shrink your vision to fit your comfort zone. But when you walk in faith, you expand your vision to fit God's power. That's why the fearful stay where they are, while the faithful step in to increase. The Israelites who feared the giants never entered the promised land, but Joshua and Caleb who believed it inherited it all. God's multiplication always follows movement. When he sees faith, he releases favor. The size of your miracle will always match the size of your trust. Fear looks at the storm, faith speaks to it. Fear looks at the lack, faith declares overflow. Whatever you focus on grows, and when you focus on God's faithfulness, your faith begins to multiply. The faithful understand that obedience is the key to divine increase. They know that results don't come from striving, but from trusting. When you obey, even in uncertainty, heaven honors your courage. God never multiplies hesitation. He multiplies devotion. When you give in faith, he gives in overflow. When you move in faith, he opens doors no man can close. The fearful wait for proof before acting, but the faithful act before proof appears. That's why miracles meet movement. The moment you move, God meets you on the path of obedience. When you keep doing what's right, even when it feels wrong, when you keep sowing even when it hurts, you're proving to heaven that you can be trusted with more. God doesn't bless the one who hides in fear. He blesses the one who steps out with faith in their heart and trust in their voice. Fear will always present 1,000 reasons why it's not the right time, but faith only needs one reason. God said so. The faithful live by that truth. They don't calculate the risk, they remember the promise. They don't let fear dictate their future. They let faith determine their destiny. Fear feeds on uncertainty, but faith feeds on revelation. The more you meditate on God's word, the less room fear has to grow. Every promise you believe weakens the grip of fear. Every step you take in trust widens the door of provision. Faith doesn't deny reality, it redefines it through divine truth. The fearful see impossibility. The faithful see opportunity. One sees the problem, the other sees the provider. And when heaven sees that kind of trust, multiplication becomes inevitable. When God multiplies, he does it through hearts that refuse to bow to fear. The faithful may tremble, but they move anyway. They may doubt for a moment, but they don't stay in doubt. Their strength isn't in perfection, it's in persistence. God honors that. When you trust him through tears, when you give even when it costs you, when you obey without seeing the result, that's faith that multiplies. Fear will always whisper, what if it doesn't work? But faith answers, what if it does? And heaven always sides with faith. When you choose faith over fear, you align with the nature of God himself, limitless, bold, and abundant. Every time you believe when it's hardest to believe, you release a wave of divine multiplication over your life, because God multiplies the faithful, not the fearful. When you look back at everything we've shared, it all comes down to one truth. Wealth doesn't begin in the bank, it begins in the heart. Faith is the currency of heaven, and your mindset is the vault that holds it. God never asked you to have everything figured out. He simply asked you to believe. When you start with what you have, when you take the little in your hand and place it in his, that's when multiplication begins. It's not about the size of your resources, but the strength of your faith. Heaven responds to motion, not fear, not hesitation, but obedience. When you trust God enough to move, even when you can't see the whole path, he begins to reveal doors, opportunities, and blessings that were waiting all along. Your thoughts shape your reality, your faith shapes your future, and your obedience shapes your abundance. Fear may whisper that you're unqualified or unprepared, but faith declares that you're chosen and equipped. You were never created to live small, to struggle endlessly, or to settle for just enough. You were designed for overflow, for divine increase, for supernatural favor. God multiplies the faithful, not the fearful. And as you walk in faith, you'll see that what you once called not enough was the perfect seed for your miracle. So today, choose faith over fear. Choose gratitude over lack. Choose to start where you are and trust that God will take you further than you've ever dreamed. The same God who made a way for Abraham, Joseph, and David is the same God writing your story. You are not forgotten. You are being prepared for increase. Believe it, speak it, and live it, because your season of abundance has already begun. Thank you, and God bless you richly.